I just ran a PR at the Aramco Houston Half Marathon, and this is my detailed race recap. These videos tend to get a little bit long, so I'm just gonna jump right in it. Let's first talk about the kit that I decided to wear. The shoe that I picked for the half marathon was a very special one. It's the Adidas Pro Evo 1. It's a $500 shoe that a lot of people had a hard time getting their hands on. I had a chance to review it late last year, and I thought that it would be the perfect shoe to take for a half marathon, at least for someone like me with my mechanics and what I was feeling from the shoe. I felt like it was more like a super Takumi Sen rather than a super Adios Pro. And because I love the Takumi Sen for 5K, 10K racing and for mile repeat type of workouts, I thought that the Evo 1 would be a perfect racing shoe for me, and I thought it worked out absolutely fantastic. It was lightweight, it was nimble. I felt like I had a lot of that Takumi kind of dynamics coming from the shoe, but just with a lot more foam and a very light and special foam as well. And so I didn't have any problems with it at all. I didn't regret it at any moment. I really enjoyed having this shoe on. Do I think that it's worth like all the hype of the $500 is super rare, like all that stuff? Maybe. It's a really fun shoe to run in. It's very special, but like I certainly wouldn't pay over retail to get my hands on a fresh pair, especially given the relatively short anticipated race lifespan for a shoe like this. But overall, I'm really happy with the shoe choice, and it treated me very well. In terms of the rest of the kit for half tights, I went with the version 1 of the Janji running half tights. In year 1, the half tights were just a little bit longer, and given some of the anticipated weather for this race, I thought that having a little bit longer, a little bit warmer of a half tight would have been just fine. So that's why I picked those, and they ended up working out just right for me. For the singlet, I went with the Kofuzi Run Club singlet, the team singlet that I put together with Rabbit. It was really nice and lightweight. Also, the black and white kind of matched with the shoes that I was running in, so to the extent that that matters, I felt good about it. And the singlet was just the right amount of clothing for me to wear for the temperatures that we had and the race conditions that we had on the day. I did have some gloves that I wore for the entire time. I wore these Trailheads gloves. They're nice and super thin. For the hat, I went with a brand new non-elite collab hat that I've been working on with Path Projects. This will be coming out soon. It's part of a 6-star chaser series, so on the underside of the brim there is the names of all the major marathons that's in here. And because for me, this is what is going to be the kickoff in Houston for what will be the year where I get those last 2 stars, so I can get that 6-star medal. I felt like it was a really great way to start the year, and it was very comfortable. If you're familiar with Path Projects hats and you like them, you're going to like this one as well. Before the race in the corrals, I did have a pair of thin like A6 track pants and a Say Sky jacket, also a really thin layer. I was worried that that might not be warm enough given some of the temperature conditions that we were expecting, but it ended up being just fine. There's a lot of people around you in the corrals as well, so I felt like in terms of like the level of dress and clothing for warmth versus wanting to stay nice and cool for racing, I felt like I had struck a really nice balance there. All right, now let's talk about getting into the weather conditions. I've already mentioned them a couple of times. The forecast had changed a bunch in the week leading up to the race. It went from being hot and super windy to cold and super windy to just really cold. And then we ended up with temps that started out in the low 40s with 10 miles sustained winds out of the north with 15 to 16 mile per hour gusts. And that ended up being like a really nice temperature to run in. It didn't feel like it was in the mid to low 30s like the anticipated like real feel temperatures were going to be. It just felt like a nice brisk morning run that felt really great to be running in half tights, a singlet, and a thin layer of gloves. You start out this race in the dark before technical sunrise because it starts at 7 and sunrise wasn't until 7:21. But there was plenty of light, and once we got to about like the 10K mark, the sun really started to come out, and so we even lost a lot of the cloud cover. I think that would have been hard for some of the marathoners out there, but for us half marathoners, it ended up being just fine. And for me, there's other than a section, and we'll talk about it in more detail, that I really felt like I had a strong headwind. I felt like I really couldn't have asked for much better racing conditions, at least for the half marathon. Let's get into the morning of the race itself. getting from my hotel to bag check. I stayed at a hotel just a couple of blocks away from the convention center downtown Houston, where kind of like the center hub of everything is. That's where the expo is. That's where you're gonna go drop off your bags, and that's how you get to the corrals. And that's also where you end up finishing the race and warming up after the race as well. The whole thing is really well organized. There's plenty of space. Everything's bigger in Texas, so there's room for everyone. I was able to get in there really early, just relax, sat down on the floor. It was in a indoor environment. It wasn't exactly warm in there, but it wasn't cold either. I wasn't fighting the wind. I wasn't huddling somewhere in the corner in the dark outside. And so it was really comfortable to be able to be there. Bag check is very well organized. There's an entire section for full marathon, an entire section for half marathon. And so just dropping off the bag was as quick as just walking up and dropping off the bag, at least when I did that at 6 o'clock ahead of the 7 o'clock start. After 6 o'clock, I went outside and then I did a little bit of a warm up. I figured that the corrals closed at 6:45. I wanted to be in them by 6:30. So giving myself about 30 minutes to do a little bit of a warm up, do some drills since this was a half marathon, and also use the bathroom one more time would have been a good thing to do. There were plenty of bathrooms at the convention center indoors. There's urinals in there as well, so that was super easy for me. There was a lot of long lines already at 6 a.m., but I just kept running around the ballpark, which is right by where the corrals line up. And there were sections where like there were just banks of porta potties that I could just go in and there was no line at all. So if you find yourself at like 6 o'clock in the morning in Houston waiting in line for a porta potty, just move to another bank. You'll be able to find another one in another area that probably doesn't have a very long line. Eventually I got close to the corral at about 6:30. I did a little bit of drills, a couple of strides, but I wanted to make sure I got in there with plenty of time for the 7 o'clock start, because there's only 4 corrals in this entire race. And that's a lot of people between the full marathon and the half marathon. So the corral A that I was in contains a lot of runners of a very wide range of paces. And so they do a good job of having signs posted for like, if you want to run an 8:30 mile, an 8-minute mile, a 7:30 mile, a 7-minute mile, they have that like sectioned out. So people kind of line themselves up. And I feel like that was pretty good in terms of self-organization. Not all races do the runners do that very well, but this one it seemed like they did. I was at the front of it because I was trying to run 6:30s to start, and that was like the fastest group. So it was weird because I knew I was standing like right underneath the sign in the right spot, but also I could see other people around me and hear them talking, and they were running all much faster. So I kind of found myself moving back further and further from that 6:30 per mile sign, even though that's kind of like where I should have been lining up, just because there was a lot of other fast runners. And for the most part, the other thing about this is that everyone was pretty chill. I've been to some other races, like CIM is one, and all the World Marathon Majors are another one, where people like try to get into the corral as late as possible. And so like as we get close to corral closing time, I could be standing in a spot and all of a sudden I'll start getting nudged and bumped because people are shoving their way in front of me. I didn't feel a lot of that here at this race, so kudos to everyone who ran Houston for being chill and cool about it. And even then, like where the corrals kind of line up, they'll move the ropes and then you kind of have to walk and make a turn and walk a little bit more. So there's time to do a little bit more maneuvering between when you are like standing in the corral until right before when the race starts. So like I think everyone kind of figured that out and everyone was nice and chill. Now, in contrast to how chill everyone kind of was lining up for the race, once the gun went off, there was a lot of pushing and shoving. And some of my faster friends have kind of told me about this phenomenon that happens at a lot of races. I'm typically a little bit further back. So that means that like I'm not used to that. I'm more used to everyone's just kind of like walking, sauntering up to the start line, and then we'll start running once they hit it. And there's usually a lot of room. This race, there was a lot of elbowing and jostling for people to get position once they got to the starting line. I almost knocked over my friend Tafari as we were coming out of the gate because I got bumped and then I felt his legs bumping into mine and I was really worried that he was going to hit the deck, but fortunately he was able to maintain his balance. I was also lined up with my friend Seth Epley, who I ran in the mountains with last summer. And he was running about the same pace as me and Tafari. Tafari and Seth were both running the marathon. I was running the half, but we all wanted to do about the same pace. Seth got separated from us within like 10 seconds, and I didn't see him again for the rest of the race until after I had finished, and then I came back out to watch some of the marathoners. So like there was a lot of kind of like frenetic activity at the start. I really wanted to try and keep it a little bit more chill, but after like the first 100 meters or so, things kind of started to spread out and people found their space. And at that point, things were kind of chill again. There was still a lot of people trying to figure out where they were, not too much zigzagging going on as far as people trying to weave and dart through people to get to where they wanted to be. So it was nice after that kind of like first 100 meters of a little bit of kind of like bumping that was happening at the start of the race. And I specifically wanted to be chill for the start of the race because I know that there aren't a lot of uphills at Houston, but there is a slight uphill at the start. And I just didn't want to like come out of the gate from like standing still in the cold in the crowds to running harder than I needed to at the start of the race. So I kind of like let things happen around me, and Tafari and I kind of stayed back. I think he really wanted to get moving faster, but I think he sensed that I wanted to stay back a little further, so we waited together and eventually kind of found our groove in the first 5K. It ended up being a little bit on the slow side, but that's what I was planning for. Hopefully it didn't mess Tafari up too much in terms of what his plans were, but our first 5K was 20 minutes and 19 seconds. It was, again, a bit slow because I was targeting 20-minute 5Ks for the entire race. Overall, I'm proud of myself for having a little bit of discipline at the start and just kind of like letting myself ease into the race. Now, before I get further into my discussion of the 5K splits, and that's how I'll break it up, I do want to talk about elevation profile. Now, the elevation profile that they show on the website is really weird, and it's not to scale, although it looks like it should be to scale. Like the numbers are kind of goofy. But the basic thing that I will say about the overall Houston Half Marathon course is it is one of the flattest courses I've ever run. My hometown race is the Chicago Marathon, so I know flat courses. This one I feel like is even flatter, at least for the half marathon distance. The full marathon distance has a couple more rollers in it, but for the half marathon distance, this is an extremely flat race. For the most part, I just felt like it was an even grade the entire time. Even certain parts of the race where I knew it was going to be a slight incline over an extended period, I just didn't really feel it all that much. Maybe I was just too distracted, but I just didn't feel like I was running the inclines that the elevation profile shows. And so that was a really nice surprise. There is one really big downhill that you hit later in the race, maybe a little bit after the 15K mark. And then you make a right turn to head back towards downtown. And on the map, it shows there's a blip of an uphill. And I was really worried about that, but that ended up being really not all that noticeable at all. There is one little bit of a hill, a stinger at the end of a kind of a gradual uphill. And so it's even flatter than it looks. All right, let's get to the second 5K. 5K to 10K, that's when we started to really find our rhythm. We came in at 20 minutes and 1 second for my like manual 5K lap split, and I felt like that's just absolutely spot on. The running felt easy. The sun was starting to come up. We were able to run on some really nice gradual downhills. And then eventually I felt like from there, you go from gradual downhills to kind of like a commercial area where there's buildings that were blocking the wind if there was a side wind. But a lot of times it was also a tailwind because the wind was coming from the north. Now, in terms of aid stations, there are aid stations after mile 2. They're every mile and a half. So there's frequent enough aid stations, although I only ended up using 2 of them through the course of my half marathon, and I took Gatorade each time. In this 5K to 10K split, that's where I took my first cup of Gatorade, and I was taking gels every 5K. Now, from the 10K to 15K, in that time period, that's when we split off from the marathoners. And so what started out as a nice and large group of people that we were all hitting the same paces like clockwork together, all of the people that I happened to be running with split off. And so I suddenly found myself by myself. There was a couple of people in front of me and a couple of people way behind me. I elected to try to catch up to that group and try to cobble together a little bit of a coalition, because I knew once we ran around the fountain, we were going to be running north and into the headwind. And so I found a couple of people to run with there, and we kind of took turns in terms of who was leading and who was feeling strong, or sometimes we'd come across another group, catch up to them, let them block wind for us for a little bit, and then we'd advance ahead and get up to the front as well. So I spent some time in front of the wind. I spent some time behind some other people as well. It was really nice to kind of share the load that way. But in that stretch going north, that's when it just got a lot quieter, and there were a lot fewer runners to be able to run with. And so that's when it really started to hurt. I had some friends out on the course cheering me on, and that was a really great place to see them, because I starting to feel a little bit nervous about how hard everything was starting to feel. The split for the 15K mark, the 5K split, was 20 minutes and 3 seconds. So still pretty much spot on, but it was really starting to get difficult. The next 5K split from 15K to 20K, that's when things got really hard. That's when the wind was the strongest, because the road got really open and wide and there weren't buildings to block it. The sun started to come out, so the temperature started to creep up a little bit. I didn't really sense it being a problem, but it was getting a little bit warmer and a lot sunnier out. And just like mentally, that's where I felt like some of the gaps in my training preparing for this race really started to show. I didn't really get to do as many hard long runs as I would have liked to for this build-up. And I think that what I missed from that is the ability to really lock in on race pace and keep pressing, like cranking on the throttle, even when things were hurting. And so I just felt like my brain was telling me like, hey, you better back off. You're not going to be able to hold it. Or if you slow down by 10 seconds a mile, you'll still have a pretty good day, but it just won't hurt as much, and you'll feel good afterwards, And so like there was a lot of like mental negotiation, a lot of temptation happening at that point. And I just really felt like it's because I didn't have a lot of that training, and I was basically scared to hurt. I didn't want to feel that burn, and I was worried that if I felt the burn too early, that I wouldn't have anything left for the end, or that I really wouldn't be able to make it. The wheels might fall off. And so I had to just remind myself that like, this is just my brain being scared of it, and I just had to kind of keep pushing through. I did slow down quite a bit though in this section, and I'm trying to be kinder to myself about it looking back on it now, because there was a headwind. It was quieter. A lot of the pack had kind of splintered apart, so I felt like I was kind of either chasing people or running by myself through a lot of that point. But before my brain could go in too much of a spiral, we found that really big downhill. Like that's the only really noticeable hill of the whole race, is that there's a very big downhill. I was nervous that there was going to be a sharp uphill after that based on what the map looks like, but it just ended up being kind of like a long downhill and then a gradual flattening for a long time. And it's just flat with a slight, very, very slight uphill. It's enough that it's noticeable, but it's not so much that it creates extra pain. And so like I was able to just run through there. I was really hurting through that, but I feel proud of myself for still pushing and being able to press on through that area. I had a lot of help from the crowd support. A lot of the run groups are aligned on both sides, either in the median or on the side of the street along that part of the course. And that was really helpful to be able to get crowd support there. I definitely needed it quite a bit. The one little snafu that I had was, at that point, like one part of the road is the half marathon, the other part of the road is the marathon, because we kind of get together, but there's still a median that separates us. And at one point I saw the 20-mile marker sign, but in my kind of like mental state of racing, I just saw the 20 and I thought it was the 20-kilometer mark. And so I hit the lap on my watch, and mentally I was like, all right, 1 kilometer left. This is great. And then I very quickly realized that that's the 20-mile mark, and we're still very far from the 20-kilometer mark. And so like mentally, I kind of like gave myself my own gut punch by messing up the math a little bit in my head there. And so that was also just another kind of like mental error, a focus issue, a lack of race experience at the half marathon distance kind of issue, where I kind of was just getting in my own way. Eventually at the end of that long stretch, there is the one kind of like uphill that's really noticeable in the race. And I struggled up that hill so hard. A lot of people started passing me. I tried to be as encouraging as I could, because they were doing great. I was falling off, but I knew that the hill wasn't that long, and at the top of that hill, the Freaks Run Club would be there, and I'd be able to get some more crowd support leading into a slight downhill that goes all the way into the finish. So I got to the top of the hill, saw some friends up there, picked up from some of their energy, and it was really great to be able to experience that, because then there's like a station where photographers are elevated, you get your picture taken, and then you're heading in. You've got less than 1,200 meters left to the finish. And that last 5K from 15K to 20K was my slowest split of the race, coming in at 20 minutes and 29 seconds. So a lot slower than my goal, but overall, not bad. I'm happy with that, given the little hill that was there, the headwind, and just in that mental space, being able to fight through and still be able to hold on to that. I feel really proud of myself for that ultimately in the end. And then at that point, you've only got 1.1K to go, and it is a long straight. So it's not like something that you can start your kick immediately once you get to the top of the hill for that last straight. You've got to work a little bit. And at this point, a lot of the people that had kind of fractured from the group that we had been running together all started to kind of catch up to me. And once I saw them pass, I was like, all right, I'm going to hold on. I'm going to try to run with you guys for the rest of the way in. There wasn't a lot of chit chat going on at that point. Everyone was just working really hard. All I could hear was both wind, crowd noise, and then everyone else's breathing. It was pretty intense. Just a lot of fun, a lot of high energy. Like the adrenaline is definitely pumping at that point. But the thing to remember though is, even though you can't kick right away, once you get to that straightaway, you also can't wait too long to kick. The last portion of the race by the finish line kind of curls off to the right a little bit. So if you wait until you could see the finish line before you kick, I think that only gives you about 100 meters. So there's a point where you're running down the straight, and then you'll start seeing the cards that separate the half marathon and the marathon. There's like a barrier that lines the right-hand side if you're running the half marathon. I think once those start, that's probably a good point to start your kick. I think at that point, you're maybe 200 meters out, but just don't wait to see the finish line, because it might be a little bit too late. But for me, the finish line couldn't come fast enough. I was really struggling and hurting quite a bit. I did end up running faster, kind of like the last leg after the 13-mile mark, according to Strava. I ran at 6 minutes per mile, so that's really fast, and faster than I thought I was moving for that last stretch of the race. But I feel happy and proud that I had something left to give, and I was able to finish strong. Came in at an official time of 1:25:07, and gave a lot of high fives to all the people that I had been running with all morning long. And it was a really, really good finish. There was a ton of dry heaving on my part. Saw a little bit of vomiting from the other runners, but for the most part, there was just a lot of really good energy at the finish line. The volunteers and the people working the race were really nice, and they weren't too aggressive in terms of trying to keep the finish line area clear. For the size of this race, that finish line is a little bit small though, so they do have to kind of make sure people are moving. I got a bottle of water, walk through a little bit more, back to the convention center, you pick up your medal, and then shortly after that, they put you back inside. So that's nice because even then, like even though the temperatures were rising, I still was gonna start feeling cold really, really soon. And I did, even though we were inside, but it was nice to at least be inside where it's warmer. Tons of bananas, volunteers, they're giving away chocolate milk as well to get you rehydrated and feeling back to normal as soon as possible. And then you go inside, you pick up your finisher t-shirt, you can go pick up your bags, everything went really smoothly. And then there's breakfast afterwards, which is one of my favorite things about this race, is that they feed you afterwards as well. So that was really nice. I ended up not having much of an appetite, unfortunately. So I did try to eat a little bit, but I just basically took some nibbles and then I finished a cup of coffee, and then I was out back onto the race to go find some of my friends who were finishing up on the marathon. And I just had such a fun time cheering for everyone over there. Now let's circle back again and let me talk to you guys about the nutrition plan a little bit more specifically before I end here. I mentioned already that I was gonna take gels every 5K. And normally for marathons, I take gels every 4 miles. So like still pretty close, a little bit more frequently for this half marathon. And while I didn't think that I would need it to prevent hitting the wall or anything at this race, I just wanted to make sure I had sugar in the system, because I think that, one, you're burning a lot of sugar, so being able to have sugar in your system is really important for a race as long as a half marathon. And I also feel like having sugar readily available in your bloodstream because you're taking gels along the way helps your brain signal to you that it's okay to continue pushing. And so I felt like if I didn't have gels, mentally my brain would have been like, hey, I'm feeling like there's less sugar in the system, maybe we should back off. So already a lot of the things that I'm worried about is my brain kind of tricking me to slowing down. I felt like they would have been more if I didn't overload the system, or I guess load the system with sugar. Taking 60 grams of carbs in the first hour seemed to really work well for me. I had no real GI problems with taking the gels. I did take a second cup of Gatorade. So I think probably in the in the 15 to 20K range, I took another cup of Gatorade. But I felt like that was the right amount of fluid and sugars for me to have in my system. Afterwards, like I mentioned, I didn't have a huge appetite, but I also didn't feel wrecked like I have after a couple of the marathons that I've run before. And so I felt like the Science and Sport sat really well, and it gave me a really nice amount of sugar. And also the ones that I take have caffeine in them as well, which I think helps with focus, which is something that I need to kind of make sure I'm not like daydreaming, which is when a lot of like the doubts start to creep in. So caffeine and sugar is what I wanted to make sure I had a lot of, and I felt like I had the right amount. I probably could have done with a little bit more sugar. That probably would have been okay too. Something for me to tinker around with in the future. As far as what I was eating the day before the race, I kind of just ate to what I felt like eating. I don't try to worry about it too much. I didn't like try to like eat a sleeve of bagels a day, but I did bring a lot of Tailwind with me, and each of the like packets, and they're pretty big packets of Tailwind, has 50 grams of carb in it. So the day before the race, I had 2 Tailwind, so 100 grams liquid that way. I had a couple of cups of orange juice at lunch, and then I also had a Martin 160 because I just had one laying around at home. 2 days before the race, I had another 2 packets of the Tailwind, so that's another 100 grams. And then I also had some extra packets of Drip Drop, which is like a hydration. It has some sugar, but it's mostly about electrolytes that's in that. So I had some of that as well as some other sugary drinks like juices and stuff like that. So, you know, probably close, maybe 200 grams of liquid carbs in addition to whatever else I'd eaten throughout the course of the travel day. I ate a lot of like granola bars and cookies and other just snacks as I was traveling. But that's a kind of like the approach that I took for carb loading for this race, and I felt really good. I felt like I had the right amount of sugar. I think this is even more sugar than I tend to consume before a marathon, so it's definitely something that I'll take forward for my marathon kind of like carb loading regime as well, just to make sure I'm bolstering whatever I'm eating with a lot of liquid carbs. I also was pretty chill for this weekend. Normally on a race weekend, I am out and about doing all sorts of shakeout runs, activities, going to media activations, just seeing as many people as I can. This race, I basically like went to one event a day, go to the expo to pick up my bib, and then I pretty much stayed home. Or I did a shakeout run with the Kofuzi Run Club, and then I pretty much went back to the hotel and put my feet up. So I felt like that also really helped in mentally and physically preparing me for the race. And so this is was a really successful race for me. A 1:25:07 is more than a minute of a PR from my 2019 half marathon PR. So I'm feeling really good about that. And now I'm going to be looking forward to hopefully a spring marathon coming up. And so I'm going to have to finalize some plans for that relatively soon. And then within about a week or so, I'll be back on the horse and training again. So for now, in the Houston Half Marathon, that's all my thoughts in terms of the race recap. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to see you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?